America loves to flex its winners, but drive a few exits off the interstate and you hit towns where the power flickers, the pavement buckles, and the tap water itself feels like a gamble. And that's where this story really starts. Beyond the bright billboards and roaring stadiums are communities that never made it into the feel-good comeback montage. No stable jobs, weak safety nets, no national spotlight, just aging houses with suspiciously low prices and a heavy, earned kind of quiet. These aren't rare accidents, they're what it looks like when entire zip codes quietly slide off the progress map. Today, we're taking the forgotten backroads of the United States, towns where cheap real estate can be less of a life hack and more of a warning label. Homes that cost less than used cars, streets lined with plywood instead of people, infrastructure that exists more in paperwork than in concrete. Stay with me, because by the end, you'll never scroll past a $15,000 listing the same way again. One town on this list had hookworms show up in recent medical studies. Another has fewer than 40 residents and no working sewer system at all. In one place, federal letters still arrive addressed just to current resident, like the system stopped bothering to learn names. Think you already know the worst towns in America? Let's put that confidence on trial. Pick the wrong place, and you don't just risk money, you risk your time, your health, and your sanity, especially when we get to Gloucester, Mississippi. If that name doesn't ring a bell, that's part of the problem. And if you've ever fantasized about buying a dirt-cheap house in a quiet rural town, this countdown might save you from a very expensive mistake. Watch to the end if you want better decisions, or at least fewer catastrophic ones. And near the finish line, I'll ask you to support my channel in one tiny way that helps a lot. Let's start the list. Number 10, Cairo, Illinois. There's a town where the streetlights still snap on every night, like they're waiting for neighbors who left a long time ago. That town is Cairo. It sits at the meeting point of the Mississippi and Ohio rivers, a location that once looked like destiny. For decades, riverboats, trains, and factories kept this place busy. Then trade routes shifted, industries left, and the exits saw more traffic than Main Street. At its peak, Cairo had around 15,000 residents. Today, it's under 2,000. That's less a gentle decline and more an economic evacuation stretched over generations. Homes list for $10,000 to $25,000 and still struggle to sell. Roughly 40% of the people left live below the poverty line. Whole blocks are boarded up. Utilities technically run, but it sometimes feels like they're powering an empty stage. Cheap houses don't mean cheap lives. When work is scarce and basic services are far away, every mile costs more and every dollar reaches less. You might pick up a house for the price of an old Honda, but your commute could be to nowhere and your nightlife might be loose siding clapping in the wind. The quiet here isn't cozy, it's heavy. And if watching a town hollow out is unsettling, wait until we see a place where billions of dollars flowed in, and somehow most residents are still waiting for the payoff. Number 9, Camden, New Jersey. Across the Delaware River from Philadelphia's glass towers sits Camden, close enough to see prosperity, but far enough to be walled off from most of it. This is where the American dream blew a tire and has been grinding on the rim ever since. Camden has lived in a long-running economic glitch. Median home values hover around $17,000. The poverty rate clears 36%. Unemployment often runs close to double the national average. Violent crime frequently ranks near the highest in the country. And yet, since the early 2010s, more than $2 billion in public and private investment has poured in. Corporate offices, new police tech, a polished waterfront. On paper, it looks like a turnaround. On the ground, it's different. Residents watch new buildings rise by the river while still taking multiple buses just to reach a decent grocery store. Living here means underfunded schools, limited clinics, and decades of promises that always seem to land one neighborhood over. Getting a straightforward mortgage on a $20,000 house can be harder than getting a predatory cash advance loan. There are plenty of patrol cars, but not enough working trash cans. You might get stopped walking to buy a sandwich and still struggle to find a functional ATM. If corporations collect giant tax breaks, should they be required to hire locals or fix streets, or is a logo on the skyline enough? Hold that thought as we cross another river. Number 8, East St. Louis, Illinois. Right across from a famous arch and big league stadiums is a city where life expectancy drops by years. East St. Louis isn't just struggling, it's a blueprint for how abandonment hardens. Median home values sit around $18,000. Poverty climbs past 43%. Violent crime routinely ranks among the worst in the nation. Entire neighborhoods deal with unreliable water, broken streetlights, and irregular trash pickup, all while million-dollar condos glow on the far bank. This didn't happen by accident. East St. Louis was once an industrial heavyweight. When factories shut down and white flight accelerated, the tax base collapsed. The state took over the finances, but essential services never caught up to modern standards. Revitalization plans show up at podiums faster than they appear on streets. Living here means paying both emotional and logistical costs. Safety feels fragile, stability temporary. Residents compare it to a survival game on a half-finished map. Charred homes, flooded blocks, and roads so broken, dodging potholes becomes automatic. Imagine waking somewhere that's quiet not because it's calm, but because so many neighbors are gone. The nearest shop might be a liquor store behind thick glass. Sirens echo, then everything goes still again. If this much neglect can exist within sight of a major skyline, imagine what's happening in places the cameras never visit. Number 7. Selma, Alabama. Selma changed America's laws. America never really changed Selma's budgets. The bridge appears in documentaries and school lessons. Leaders return every few years to walk across it for commemorations. But once the cameras leave, long-term investment often leaves too. Median home prices sit in the low $20,000 range. Roughly 40% of residents live below the poverty line. The population has dropped sharply since the 1960s. One main hospital serves the area and has faced financial strain. Private sector jobs are limited and often low pay. Selma isn't dangerous in the cinematic chaos way outsiders sometimes imagine. The real threat is slow-motion stagnation. Young people leave because the opportunities they want already moved on. Tourists come to see the bridge and wonder why the town feels so empty. The answer isn't in the history chapter, it's in the funding charts. Selma gets honored more than it gets rebuilt. You'll find plaques and parades, but classrooms, roads, and clinics tell a different story. Living here means carrying equal parts pride and frustration. If a city this iconic can be left in limbo, what do you think happens to towns that never make it into a textbook? Number 6. Pine Bluff, Arkansas. Pine Bluff isn't poor just because it's small. It's poor because the wider economy outgrew it and never circled back. For decades, this city did the work: farms, mills, factories. When those jobs left, Pine Bluff got speeches and not much else. Median home values land in the low 20s, with some listings under $15,000. Roughly a third of residents live in poverty. Unemployment stays above the national average. Violent crime rates are several times the U.S. norm. Since around 2000, the population has dropped by more than a quarter. Drive through town and you see boarded-up shops and vacant lots where houses used to stand. Listings talk about potential, but rarely explain where the investors or employers will come from. Arkansas often ranks near the bottom in funding for schools, healthcare, and infrastructure. Poor, majority-black places like Pine Bluff feel those rankings first. Federal help tends to arrive as grants for crime reduction or prisons, not new industries. One of the steadiest employers in the area is the correctional system. That's not revival, that's managed decline with a paycheck attached. Houses are cheap, but they come bundled with fewer job options, thinner medical care, and schools constantly fighting for resources. People don't leave because they hate Pine Bluff, they leave because staying requires endurance, when what they want is opportunity. Number 5. Johnstown, Pennsylvania. Johnstown has survived lethal floods, the collapse of steel, and decades of population loss. It's still here, but only as a fraction of what it once was. Median home prices hover around $22,000, with many houses under $15,000. The population has fallen from over 60,000 in the mid-1900s to around 18,000 today. More than a third of residents live in poverty. Child poverty is even higher. Jobs have been slow to replace what the mills once provided. The result is a city that feels part museum, part neighborhood. Hills rising over rusted bridges and old buildings lining streets that are quieter than they should be. Federal and state aid has come in bursts, but rarely at a scale that reinvents the economy. Johnstown is part of broader programs for struggling Appalachian communities, yet funding often gravitates toward towns with more tourist polish. Johnstown gets pilot projects and planning documents. Living here can feel like being stuck in conversation with the past. Everyone remembers when the mills roared and downtown buzzed. Now it's thrift shops, discount chains, and faded for lease signs. The main tourist attraction? A museum about the disaster that nearly wiped the town off the map. History is thick here, but history doesn't cover groceries, medicine, or rent. Number 4. Marianna, Arkansas. Marianna is the kind of place where even legendary food couldn't outrun poverty. A town that once drew travelers for Southern cooking now has more empty storefronts than open kitchens. Median home prices sit between roughly $17,000 and $23,000. The poverty rate is above 45%, putting the community among the poorest in the nation. Median household income is less than half the U.S. average. Unemployment often hangs around double the national rate. This isn't just a broke town, it's a town that feels structurally sidelined. Arkansas already struggles with public health, education, and infrastructure. Small, remote places like Marianna end up at the bottom of the priority list. Yes, you can buy a house here for under 20 grand, but what you're buying into is cracked roads, aging pipes, limited access to doctors, and grocery aisles stocked heavier with junk food than fresh produce. The local economy runs mostly on low wages, government benefits, and stubborn persistence. That $13,000 house might look tempting online, but you have to ask, how much will you pay back in gas, stress, and lost opportunities just to live in it? Number 3. Allenville, Missouri. Allenville barely has a downtown because repeated floods literally erased pieces of it that were never rebuilt. It's basically a tiny ghost town with a census entry. The population sits just under 40 people. Some homes list for less than $6,000. There's no functioning sewer system. Power is limited and fragile. The roads look like something a rental company would warn you about in bold print. There are no stores, no pharmacies, and almost no local jobs. Floods from nearby waterways have chewed up the town again and again. Local leaders have asked for flood control projects and drainage systems, but bigger communities with more voters usually get the money. Allenville gets mentioned in reports. That $6,000 house stops looking like a bargain when you realize it comes with chronic flooding, failing infrastructure, and emergency help that's many miles away. Here, affordable mostly means forgotten by everyone who writes the checks. Number 2. Whitehall, Alabama. Whitehall has a sewage crisis so severe that researchers have found evidence of hookworm infections, an illness most people thought was left back in the early 1900s. Median home values sit around $19,000 or $20,000. Poverty hovers near 40%. Unemployment is higher than state and national averages. Healthcare is thin. Specialists and hospitals can be an hour away, turning simple appointments into half-day missions. This is what happens when infrastructure failure becomes a public health story. On paper, there are grants to fix failing septic systems in rural areas. In practice, unlocking that money takes political muscle and administrative capacity that tiny, poor communities rarely have. Whitehall shows up in studies and news pieces, but paperwork doesn't fix pipes. Cheap homes here aren't simple deals. They're discounted tickets into a situation where your yard might flood with waste, your water might be questionable, and your job prospects limited. That $19,000 price tag hides huge costs in stress, time, and risk. Would you sign up for a house that comes bundled with 19th century sanitation problems? Some people do, because they don't have many alternatives. Number 1. Gloucester, Mississippi. If America keeps pretending towns like this don't exist, Gloucester is the preview reel, quiet, cheap, and easy to ignore. Gloucester is a small town in southwest Mississippi, near the Louisiana border. It once revolved around timber. When the mills closed, the main reason to stay thinned out with them. The population sits under 1,000 and has been drifting downward for years. Median home prices fall roughly between $13,000 and $18,000. Some houses go for less than a ride-on mower. The poverty rate is close to 50%. Job options are scarce. The main employers are gas stations, dollar stores, and prison facilities out on the highway. There's no full-service grocery store, no dentist, no real pharmacy. Getting food, medicine, or basic care often means a long drive if you have a working car and gas money. Gloucester isn't dangerous because of nightly chaos. It's dangerous because of what happens when things go wrong.
Lose your job, get sick, or have your car break down, and there's almost no backup. Distance and isolation become the real threats. Mississippi already ranks near the bottom for health, income, and education. Rural, majority black places like Gloucester sit near the bottom of that baseline. Development programs exist, but they tend to favor towns with grant writers, matching funds, and political connections. Gloucester has little of that, so the investment flows away. On real estate sites, it can look like a peaceful, budget-friendly escape. In real life, it's long drives for everything essential, limited emergency care, and almost no clear path to building wealth. You're constantly doing the math. Can I afford to stay here if nothing changes? A local once phrased it in a way that fits nearly every town on this list. We don't leave because we hate it. We leave because there's nothing left to grow into. Across all 10 places, one pattern repeats. Ultra-cheap houses are not automatically opportunities. Sometimes they're just the visible symptom of decades of invisible neglect. So the next time a $12,000 house flashes across your feed and you think, maybe I could move there and start over, ask a better question. What's the true cost of that zip code once you factor in jobs, schools, healthcare, distance, and what happens when life goes wrong? If this changed how you look at affordable real estate or those viral cheap house clips, hit like and help my channel so more people understand what's really hiding behind those unbelievably low prices.